Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about His Dark Materials, Season 1, Episode 1. It's called Lyra's Jordan. So full spoilers, actually not full spoilers, it's Episode 1. We will start spoiler free because it's in Episode 1, and we will give our thoughts on it in general before we go into spoilers somewhere in the middle, which we will warn you for. This is the HBO BBC co-production that's based on, is the book called His Dark Materials?
That's the trilogy name, I believe.
Okay.
The individual books. I think the first one is just called Golden Compass.
Yes, because
the movie was called.
There was a movie called The Golden Compass, which I did
know
not
there's
see.
The Golden Compass, there's the Amber Spyglass. I don't know what the third one's called. I'm blanking.
So this is kind of it's a fantasy world where everyone has an animal, which is their soul.
Yes.
As the opening text described it, they're daemon, I think it said. And Daphne Keane plays Lyra, who's kind of this chosen one who's going to save the world or something.
Maybe go on a quest and do some shenanigans.
Go on a quest to the north where everything's really cold, and there's a regime in power. It wasn't the magistrate; it was like the
Magisterium.
Magisterium, yeah.
Yeah, big religious organization is the point.
Yes, but they're in power, and they're very strict, very dictatorship's maybe the right word, but they're very. Let's just say they'll clamp down on any heresy that's been spouted.
They're your classic organized religion in control.
And we have hidden mystical things that they don't want to be revealed, that James McAvoy's character is kind of on the path to revealing, and everyone's kind of shocked at the ideas he's got. And there's also a group that's kidnapping children that's introduced in the first episode. So that sets up kind of the general gist of what's going on here. Did you enjoy episode 1?
Not really. Sorry. Did you?
Why saying sorry to me? No,
I mean, just sorry to the people.
I don't know. I didn't like it that much, but I mean, was anyone expecting me to like this that much?
Not really, but I mean, I just know that I'm seeing positive buzz around this, so it's more a sorry to the viewers. I read the first book when I was younger, didn't really like it that much. I forced myself through it, but I never really got into it. It's relatively faithful from what I can remember, but I just don't like the pacing at all in this episode.
Yeah, pacing wasn't doing much for me. The direction wasn't doing much for me. Well, I mean, I think Daphne Keane's pretty good. She's the best thing about it, honestly.
And McAvoy, to be fair, she makes
herself quite likable. Well, McAvoy's good typically, but I don't necessarily think he's particularly great in this episode. Like he's just kind of there. He's there to be the big name. Like attraction.
I think he still manages to stand out above most of the rest of them, just with some charisma.
But I think it suffers in some places from almost, and this is a problem I have with a lot of fantasies. It unloads too much. Actually, because there's text at the start.
Oh my god, it goes on so long.
And the only thing I think it needed to tell us was about the souls and the animals, because that was something we're going to see almost immediately and like be kind of like confused by. I think all the stuff about who the chosen one is and all that stuff, you didn't have to tell us any of that. We can just discover that as we go because of how people are interested in her, and you know.
Yeah, I'm okay with text at the start of things. It's a very fantasy thing to do. To a point, this went overboard with how much it was probably a good 30-40 seconds of just screens of text, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to watch something now. I'm done reading.
She's going to be important. She's going to do this thing. She's going to do that thing. Don't tell me all this. Just let the story do that.
I think the frustrating thing is we get that in a conversation between two characters later in the episode.
Yes, and honestly, not presented that much better than just a wall of text, because it's very exposition-y.
It is very exposition-y, but I still prefer that to a literal wall of text.
It's honestly the exposition in the episode wasn't doing much for me. It wasn't really presenting the mythology of the world in any way that was kind of interesting. Everything tended to be conversations where someone was just giving a list of information, whether it was because Lyra doesn't know things and she was asking, so it was being explained, or McAvoy was making a big speech about what he's found. And the McAvoy one's a little bit better because he's kind of shocking his contemporaries. He's not necessarily explaining simple things, But there was so many. There was a lot of things. Like for example, there was a line early on between the two kids. So Lyra's got this friend, let's say Roger, who's running around with her, and they're kind of chasing each other and playing, and they've got their animals with them, and he says something like, "Oh, what do you think your animal's going to settle on?" Right? And I thought that line is fine. That gives me the context of, okay, the animals change and then eventually they settle. But then he immediately followed it up with, ones that stop changing back and forth or shifting around. Like he over explained it, and it really bugged me. I'm like, don't do that. You just went one step further and explained it to us as if we're idiots. Like, no. The first part was enough. The second part is over explanation. It's funny because like there's stuff like that, and then there's also equally parts that it doesn't really go into that much. In the world, we just cut to like a separate group of characters at one point, and it kind of sets up the kids being kidnapped, and
it feels very random and separate though, doesn't it?
It feels very random. It doesn't feel like it'd be one thing if we were introduced to like at least one of these characters maybe at the start of the episode, so that it was very established that we're doing two narratives as we were going. But this comes a good third or so into the episode before we cut to this, and it feels like there's this ritual. It looks like some sort of alternate version of what a bat mitzvah. You know what I'm trying to say?
I do.
Right, bat mitzvah. Aye, I'll just go with that. Because they're like, oh, you're a man now, blah blah blah. You accepting our way, blah blah blah. All that jazz. Jazz. All that jazz actually is not a
You're
bad.
really struggling with the whole speaking thing this evening.
Apparently, well, there's a lot of stupid words in this. But that's another thing I hate about fantasy is that they have all these names for things that I have to learn immediately. And
I don't have a problem with any of that stuff. I've got problems with this episode, obviously, but that doesn't bother me.
Well, that's not a critique. That's just something I don't like about fantasy.
That's fair.
And it always bothers me in fantasy and very rarely in science fiction, even though science fiction often has the same thing. But the reason why it never bothers me in science fiction is because in science fiction, 9 times out of 10, they're not hard to remember or pronounce. They tend to be pretty straightforward, at least, phonetically easy words.
I think it's a different in language in the sense that in fantasy, they're trying to evoke, generally speaking, this older kind of style. So you go back to these older languages, you go back to kind of closer to root Latin or something like that. So it sounds foreign and archaic to us. Whereas
pretentious is the word you're looking for.
It may well indeed is a trapping of the genre at this point. Whereas sci-fi does the opposite and generally goes quite phonetic. And it's I would say typically the words that sci-fi makes up to use are a lot harsher, more staccato. They're a lot more rhythmic. Whereas fantasy words tend to be more flowing and draw from more romantic languages.
It's just one of those trappings that it's one of those barriers for fantasy with me. And like the effects for a TV show are pretty good, but they're not like amazing by like.
There's nothing I would complain about though for it being a TV show. Like if this was a movie, I'd probably be going, well, I've maybe been expecting more from a high budget movie, but from a TV show, I'm like, yeah, this is good enough.
Here's the weird thing though, it wasn't the animals that were bugging me. It was like the
airships,
the airships and the citywide shots. It was all that stuff, which should be the easier of the two. The animals should be tougher.
The animals actually look quite good,
but I don't know. It's funny because I think if this episode maybe focused more on like this, because we start off with McAvoy and he's in this expedition and he's looking for answers or something, and like if there was more of this like harsh like weather and him like try to like find and discover things like an archaeologist, maybe or a scientist, like maybe I could get into the adventure side of that. I
assume there's more of that as the show goes on, as she goes north.
Probably. I think one of the frustrating parts of this though is that there's so many trappings of the chosen one, but the chosen one's a child, so they're not telling them everything yet. So there's a lot of characters going, hey, I can't tell you about this yet, but here's this device that's going to be very useful. You use this. It's everything that I dislike about this type of thing, and this is including Harry Potter, which is probably the big famous example of recent years, is character, and this character's not necessarily introduced to this world right away. So she's been here the whole time. It's not like a separate world like Harry Potter is, but it still kind of plays the same way in that she's been kind of sheltered until she's like 12 or whatever age she is now.
Yeah, that was actually one of the more interesting parts of exposition. Is McAvoy comes to drop her off as a little baby and seeks Scholastic Sanctuary, I think it was called. And I thought, and you get the idea that scholars are protected from the church essentially, and they're allowed to do certain things that others aren't. They have this kind of extra freedom, and I thought, and it never dove into it, never over explained it. It was just kind of, oh no, this is a thing that we have, and it's a gift. It isn't a right that they've got. It could be revoked. They have to earn it. I thought that was interesting enough as the exposition goes.
Yeah, I guess I just wasn't that interested in anything. I
Yeah.
it's just this barrier. Like the rare times I get into something that's remotely fantasy, it has to sort of like overcome my natural dislike of it, because my default setting with this is, okay, you're going to have to impress me, because I'm not like, the olive branch isn't there. I'm not inherently excited about almost anything you're talking about. So you're going to really have to make it work on the execution, make it work on the characters, and
Yeah.
I don't think this is particularly poor in those respects. It's just not particularly great either. It's just it's serviceable.
It's fine. Yeah, I think it does have some weak pacing and weak direction, which drag it down though.
Mm.
It's funny that I'm not into this, even the books, because this is, while probably my least favorite area of fantasy. The kind of pseudo modern, kind of steampunky stuff with you got airships and stuff like that, and it's mostly kind of recognizable as Earth like. But the themes about dealing with against organized religion, all these things that it plays with, it's a critique on the Catholic Church for a lot of it. Um, it's right up my alley, and I just it shocks me that I just can't get into it. Even looking at it through that lens as an adult, I just can't, and that's a shame.
Yeah, so, interesting. This is directed by Tom Hooper, who is actually a pretty acclaimed director. Did The King's Speech, did Les Mis.
Yeah.
In recent years,
Yeah.
people like his stuff. It's not particularly for me. I mean, The King's Speech was okay, but
It wasn't badly directed though.
I've had no interest in anything else he's done since then, and this doesn't exactly do anything to change my mind. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing else to say without going into spoilers.
I like the music. Lon Balfe's doing a pretty decent score.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, the only thing I was really into was kind of Lyra being mischievous. Like, she's kind of like running around the rooftops, like sneaking in and out of windows and doing stuff. Like, I almost thought there was going to be a lot more of her, like, and how she like gets up to no good and like does things she's not supposed to.
But it moves on quite quickly.
Yeah, in and around Oxford. But yeah, it quickly very much becomes her desire to leave. And for one of my big problems is that she's very upset at McAvoy's character, Ashriel, who comes and goes, every so often. Like, he doesn't stick around very long, and there's like a big sort of like emotional goodbye for her at one point, and it kind of it felt very flat to me, because there wasn't really much between them in their scenes together, barring like one small moment that really gave as much of a connection or relationship between them. It all it didn't quite click for me at all. So
yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we'll do spoilers then. We'll give the spoiler warning and just talk about kind of anything in here that happens. So we see the one kid be kidnapped in the city, or in the
town.
The town that's sort of near Oxford. I think it's near, because we kind of see the boats going down the river as she flies away at the end. So I assume it's nearby. And eventually, her friend Roger disappears, because when she's offered this chance to leave and go to London with this new woman who shows up like 2/3 into the episode, she insists that he come with, because it's her one friend, and he'll be lonely without her, she'll be lonely without him, and this is agreed upon. But then he disappears. I don't trust this woman at all.
No, it plays it very suspiciously, and you kind of assume that she's had something to do with this, and I'm not sure if she has or not. She might have done, but.
Well, the preview at the end, because there's like a trailer for the rest of the season at the end of it, which almost was a bit too spoilery, to be honest. Based on
really?
Yeah, because I won't go into, because some people don't like watching those, and we consider that like a spoiler, so I won't get into it. But I'll just say it definitely made me lean in a few directions based on what I'd seen already. For certain
Was
characters.
it more like confirmation of what you were feeling, or did it completely change your opinion of anything?
Well, that would spoil it.
Okay.
Well, I told you how I felt, so that would spoil it if I answered that question.
Alright, fair enough.
Yeah, there's a lot of her running around. She chases after McAvoy at one point in the ship, then she chases after this woman in the ship at the end. It becomes, and this is the thing, like, they make the emotional crux, or the emotional crux of like her wanting to leave. Well, she wants to leave already. Technically, she wants to go with McAvoy up north, but the reason why she's motivated to go with this woman at the end is because it's the one chance she might have to actually help her friend, because she's explained to that, oh, these villains who take the kids, they go to London because it's easier to hide there, and that's where they always go. So she makes this choice to go, and she runs after the ship. And I felt like, you know, we had like one sort of big section at the start with them together. There was like one moment in the middle where he looked kind of like, not jealous, but almost just kind of like upset that he was being kind of ignored when Lyra was talking to this woman. And I felt like if that was going to be the crux of the whole thing, I mean, it really should have had more of them like together.
I honestly, I think the biggest problem is the last scene that we see them together is this one where she doesn't even acknowledge he's there. I don't think she even really notices. I don't think it's an intentional ignoring him. It's just she doesn't even notice him.
Yeah.
And then for the next scene to be like, well, he's my best friend, he's got to come, and then he's missing. It kind of feels a little bit hollow that, well, you didn't even notice him last night.
Yeah. It feels a bit hollow, and I didn't really feel that emotion at the end of the episode either. I like to say, this is the other thing as well. We have this whole plot beat where the headmaster tries to poison McAvoy. Like, he poisons his drink before he has this meeting with him early on, and she sees this and she kind of like jumps in and warns him, and she ends up hiding and like witnesses all of the presentation that he gives about the dust, which we'll get to the dust. And later on, when she's going to leave with this woman, like, the master like sort of seems to genuinely care about her and like gives her this device, and he's like, hey, this will show you the truth. And she's like, how do you use it? And he's like, you'll have to learn that in time. Like, oh, that's useful. Because there's a moment later on where after like the woman's like been telling her all this stuff, it's like she wants to know if it's the truth, and she's like, oh, like, where is Roger? And she just says, she speaks to as if it's Alexa. She's like, where is Roger? Tell me where Roger is.
I imagine she's thinking because it's, you know, it's a compass. It'll turn and point in the direction.
Yes, not so much.
It doesn't. No,
not so much. Yeah, there's this whole thing about the dust and how the I have to sort of just go with the idea that the dust is kind of like, I don't want to say the Force from Star Wars, but it's kind of like this ethereal like energy that kind of attracts to people, but only adults. That's the thing we learn here, is that it's only attracted to adults. And McAvoy's developed a new type of like film
kind of lens, yeah,
that can capture. Well, I think it's film, because he was talking about the lithium and, you know, the regular sort of film sort of stock. And then he talks about how he's developed a new solution. So I don't know if it's the film itself or it's how he's developing the film or whatever, but and how it shows where the dust is. But he also reveals that he's in the Northern Lights, and he's like, hey, so I took a photo with my new special filter, and there's this hidden city in the sky. And I'm assuming, I'm going to assume that like that's what the second book is that they eventually get to this magical hidden city, and that's like book 2. I think this is quite a nice visual. Sure.
The way this looks, the way it kind of blends into the lights, and I thought this looked pretty good.
So even though the story's not starting with her being introduced to a hidden world that she doesn't know about, it's getting there eventually.
Yeah, I think what makes this, in its defense, slightly more interesting is that's the point. The religious organization is hiding this from people. You know, that's why it's heresy to even talk about this. They're actively suppressing this so that people don't know about it, which I think makes it more interesting than just, you know, oh, well, let's just introduce our chosen one to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I'm still thoroughly uninterested.
Yeah, me too. I'm not really into it either. I'm just trying to be fair about it.
This is such a hard review for me. Like, sometimes we'll watch an episode of a show and I just don't give a shit about any of it.
Yeah.
And I can go through and critique, and I can go through and try and explain it, but sometimes it's less to do with like, oh, it's making all these mistakes and it's doing all these things that aren't working.
It's just how you feel about it.
Yes. And I don't think it's particularly good, but I don't think it's particularly bad either. But ultimately, because of my disinterest in the genre as a whole, it's just nothing but a wet thud for me.
I will say, as someone who is, generally speaking, interested in the genre, as a rule, not all of it, obviously, but, I'm very much more open to it than you are. I was seeing all these, five-star reviews from all these places, on the first episode. I just don't get it. I mean, even if you just say, "Oh, I'm just not that interested," I think the quality is objectively not good enough to be 5 stars, from anywhere really.
Yeah, I wonder if these reviewers though got more than one episode. Maybe.
Maybe. From the couple that I skimmed, it sounded like they were talking about just the first one, but maybe they'd seen more. I don't know.
Do you think like people who are like super fans of the book are just loving it because it's so faithful?
I think they might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see that. Which is great if you love the book and you're getting this good adaptation. It's already been renewed for a second season, so if they're maybe going to do 3 seasons for the 3 books, which would make a lot of sense.
Stands to reason. And Joe, as much as we're not enjoying this, for people who are fans of the books and have this presumably faithful and good for them adaptation.
Yeah, no, enjoy it. If you're a fan of the book and you're liking the adaptation, by all means, knock yourself out. But this is someone who's not really into fantasy and is someone who doesn't really usually get into. I know this is not technically a period piece, but it feels like one because it's set. It's meant to feel like it's the 40s or whatever, or whatever era it's meant to feel like it's in. So
especially with the fashion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's got blimps and shit, so it's not exactly the 40s, but like, it's if the Hindenburg didn't happen and that took off and that was like a thing going forward, yeah. But yeah, not for me. That's the best I could sum it up. Is that it just isn't for me.
That's a shame, isn't it? But it happens.
Yeah. So that's
one day we'll find a fantasy show that you love.
Well, Witcher's coming in December. That might be the one.
Could be.
Might be the one. So that's His Dark Materials, episode 1. Obviously, we won't be doing any more of it because neither of us like it. But let us know what you thought of the first episode in the comments below. You can like and subscribe. You can ding the bell on YouTube. Make sure you get the notifications. You can support everything we do by rating the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars. Helps more people find us and makes us grow and get bigger and yada yada yada. You can also support us financially though over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. We can do that for as little as $1 per month to get some bonuses. The higher tiers you get voting rights and other things, and producer credits and all that sort of thing. So go and have a look and see if you're interested. Otherwise, get us on Twitter at mailed_fuzz for channel updates, and that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. If you want to see more reviews, episode 1 reviews specifically, we did a couple of the Apple shows over the weekend. We did C, starring Jason Momoa, and we reviewed the first episode of For All Mankind. So if you're interested in our thoughts on those, you can go check out those too. But that's us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys. Have you got any vanilla?